Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and yeah, it's Friday. Normally on Fridays we upload our best decks for ranked mode video, where I let you guys know what decks you should be playing for this upcoming week to grind or to rank up in the ranked battles for Pokemon Pocket. However, we only have, I think, 3 days from this video when it's being released here on Friday to when the ranked season ends. And to be 100% honest with you guys, I believe we've already covered all of the other top decks in the format right now. So to be honest, if you're kind of wondering what decks you should be playing going into this particular weekend to finish off the ranked season, go back and just take a look at our videos over the last sort of week or so. All of the best decks that you can possibly be playing, I believe we've covered already. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, it's actually going to be like a different kind of phenomenon that I'm really interested in, that always kind of happens at the end of formats. And by formats, I mean, of course, when a set comes out, there's a time period where people play all of those new cards in that set, and the format, so to speak, is all of those new cards. And then when the new set comes out, it's a new format. So that's what I mean when I say format. Currently, we're at the end of the Extra Dimensional Crisis format, of course, and the EV Grow format will be starting shortly. But one thing that always happens, right, at the end, towards the end of these seasons, or ranked seasons, I guess is what you could call them. I'm just going to be calling them formats. What happens is, like, things really start to, like, even out in terms of the distribution of the decks that are seeing play, which decks are strong against other decks. Everything really kind of balances out, and it makes room for some really interesting archetypes to really pop up towards the end of formats. We saw this a little bit in the previous format, in the format before that. It's really interesting to see. It's like this really strange phenomenon where towards the end here in the last week or last few days or so, a ton of decks that never really saw play in the first, 2 or 3 weeks really pop up and end up actually being really solid choices. So that's what we're going to be covering in today's video. These are going to be like surprise kind of new decks that are winning and doing really well, both in ranked battles, but also in competition. So that's what we're going to cover in today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive right into it, guys. The first deck that we're going to take a look at is actually kind of the main reason why I wanted to make this video, or at least one of them, and that is going to be Gengar EX. So I think people have been really talking about Gengar throughout this entire format. Theoretically speaking, Gengar EX's ability to turn off supporter cards, your opponent's ability to play supporter cards, is really strong. And theoretically speaking, all of the top decks in Pokemon Pocket right now are very reliant on playing supporter cards. So it would make sense, right? Why isn't Gengar seeing a lot of play? Isn't Gengar like kind of a direct counter to a lot of the best decks in Pokemon Pocket right now? And yes, again, the ability does kind of turn off your opponent's ability to play supporter cards. Silvally has to play supporters to do the full damage. Things like Buzzwole and Guzzlord, really all of the Ultra Beast decks are very reliant on getting those Lucamines out to generate those extra energies. So shouldn't the effect of Gengar be extremely strong? It is, in fact. Supporters and turning off supporters is a really strong effect. I think that Gengar has always struggled with really one facet, and that's that its attack and overall sort of strength of the card, ability aside, has always been pretty weak. Truthfully, it's got 3 energies in its attack cost. There's really no, I'm trying to think, but there's almost like no Stage 2 Pokemon, even since Rare Candy has come out, that's seen play or been relevant that has like a 3 energy attack cost, other than things like Charizard or maybe some other Pokemon that, have like lesser energy attacks that you can use before it, or Pokemon that accelerate energies to themselves like Charizard. So in general, Gengar's attack is very, very weak. And I think they did that to balance Gengar, mainly because its effect is really, really strong. And of course it is, but Spooky Shot, 3 psychic energies, 100 damage, is not great. 100 damage is quite bad, especially in a format with a lot of other Rare Candy cards that are playing copies of Lily to basically survive 2 attacks from your only really attacking option when you're playing Gengar. So in general, Gengar's quite weak. So it's also a bit slow. So it's slow and it's not very powerful. It just doesn't really do enough for us to justify playing it. That is until recently, where people have been building this sort of what we're kind of calling, or what I'm calling, like this Exodia Gengar strategy, where it really is kind of a checkmate type situation here. We are playing a 2-1-2 copy line of Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar. That is going to be our primary focus for the deck and our primary attacking option. And then we are playing the new Shiinotic, which is a psychic Pokemon, but we all know what Shiinotic's sort of effect or ability is, which allows us to thin or search Pokemon out of our deck. Really strong. We've seen this seen play actually in quite a few meta decks, whether that's Solgaleo or Magnezone as of recently, which we'll talk about later in the video. So Shiinotic is being paired now with Gengar to more consistently be able for us or allow us rather to, find the Pokemon or also maybe find rare candy, basically more consistently going into Gengar. But that's not enough. Because we're playing Shiinotic, we're also just kind of going all in on the strategy of playing a ton of Pokemon, and we are actually playing the new, or not new, but the newer, I guess, Dusknoir, which came out, I believe, a couple expansions ago. This card is really interesting. I thought it was really strong when it came out, especially now with rare candy. This is really the only deck or the only kind of situation in which I've seen it see play, but it's got the Shadow Void ability, and it reads that basically once during your turn, you may choose one of your Pokemon and move all of its damage to this Pokemon. Now, Dusknoir has 130 HP, so effectively speaking, we can move, and even if we're about to get KO, Dusknoir is a really interesting Pokemon. No matter how much damage is on Gengar, we can move all of it to Dusknoir. So it's basically like a full heal button. However, if your Gengar has more than 130 damage or 130 damage taken from it or more, we can still move all of that damage to Dusknoir, but it will knock out Dusknoir, and then your opponent will take a prize card. But at least we're full healing Gengar, and effectively trading what would be 2 prize cards if your opponent did end up KOing Gengar to 1 prize card, right, to KO Dusknoir. So that's what Dusknoir is really here for. It's basically a full heal button, but of course it is a stage 2 Pokemon, so we have to evolve into it. So that's sort of the whole point of this deck. There's a lot going on here. It's multiple pieces. It's a slow deck. It's a setup deck, but it is kind of this Exodia deck where if you do get Gengar out, you can effectively just start hitting for 100 damage. We have 2 copies of Lily here, and we have Dusknoir to basically full heal Gengar, whether we get hit by a Charizard hitting for 150 or Giratina hitting for 130 or whatever it is. We can pop off that Dusknoir, full heal our Gengar, and then continue to do 100 damage. So that's the full strategy of this deck. It does seem a little bit niche, but this is a deck list that actually has been seeing play in Master Ball rank and also in tournaments. I wouldn't say that it's really a top tier meta deck, but this entire strategy is very, very interesting. And what's crazy is it really took us like 2 or 3 weeks, not us, but I guess, I don't know, it took me at least 2 or 3 weeks to ever find this deck list and to have an example of it doing really well. And I just thought it's super interesting. And decks like these, which certainly are strong, this is definitely an interesting scenario. We've never seen a deck list like this before, but again, it's a bit awkward, it's a bit inconsistent, it's a bit slow, but Gengar's effect does hard counter a lot of decks and a lot of, top meta decks in the format right now. And again, this entire strategy here with Shiinotic, with Gengar, with Dusknoir is this really funny, like 2 or 3 or 4 card combination, honestly, that can just kind of win you games. It's really hard to beat Gengar when they kind of get this full setup going. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to showcase it because I think we've all been waiting quite some time for Gengar to really pop off. I know we just talked a lot about Gengar. We've got a bunch of other decks to take a look at, but yeah, here it is, guys. This is Gengar EX, probably the best version of Gengar or the most competitively viable version of Gengar we have ever had. And like I said, this effect here and this ability on Gengar is really, really, really strong. You can, of course, play the small Gengar, the Bother Gengar, which is like a less strong, but, non-EX version of it. I still think Gengar EX is better, especially with Dusknoir. 170 HP is impressive for sure. We're living in attack from basically every Pokemon in the game. So yeah, here it is. Here's Gengar. Really, really funny. So again, I wanted to showcase it, and that's what this video is all about. Showcasing decks that really popped up here at the end of the metagame that are doing really well, that honestly are just massively surprising. And to be fair, a lot of these decks maybe aren't seeing as much play or maybe not, as strong or as good of a choice as, things like Buzzwole or Charizard or Silvally or Solgaleo, but a lot of these decks are still really, really good. And like I said, they've been winning in Master Ball rank, they've been winning in tournaments, so they're worth mentioning. These aren't meme decks. These are legit decks that are competitive and are popping up in the metagame here towards the end of the format, which is definitely really, really interesting. Okay. We also have Charizard, of course, definitely a meta card, and then we have Stoutland. So Charizard Stoutland has also actually seen a ton of play. Charizard Silvally has actually ended up being one of the best decks or one of the most winning decks in the entire format. It won the last Ursa Days tournament. One of the most popular decks over the last 2 weeks or so. We did make a video on this a couple of weeks ago when it first popped up. I thought that Charizard and Silvally theoretically kind of shuts down most of the top meta decks in the format, an incredibly strong deck, and I would still recommend Charizard and Silvally. However, Stoutland is another sort of a niche kind of off meta card that's been popping up in a variety of different decks, and people have started to play it with Charizard, and in my mind, it kind of makes some sense. Stoutland is also a Pokemon that can utilize Lily, so this is basically a deck that's just playing a bunch of stage 2 Pokemon. We're playing Rare Candy, we're playing Lily, we're playing Pokemon, we're playing Potion rather, and that's really what this deck is all about, right? So hopefully the idea is that we are able to maybe stall our opponent out for a turn or two with Stoutland, maybe take a KO, and if we are able to do that, then we can kind of sweep through our opponent with Charizard, or vice versa. We can maybe just kind of pop off with Rare Candy Charizard on our second turn like Charizard always does. This is another deck list that seems inherently inconsistent, and to be fair, all Charizard decks are inherently inconsistent, but I think that the way that Charizard works, where it is kind of a slower card, where where it has to kind of get evolved and then come into the active spot and then stoke, it's mostly used either as this really incredibly fast-paced Pokemon that just kind of evolves in rare candies on turn 2, or it comes in the late game and is kind of this trump card, since it can live an attack with 180 HP and then guarantee basically that it's going to return an attack for 150 because it does set itself up for stoke. It is kind of this checkmate card in the late game. That's, I think, the best strategy for Charizard. So Stoutland kind of just works as this really interesting kind of buffer Pokemon, or leadoff Pokemon that we're going to have before Charizard to potentially just kind of make the game go a little bit longer to increase the potential that we do, of course, find our Charizard and go into it. So this strategy is a lot better than I honestly could have ever assumed it to be. Has popped up a lot recently. I think Charizard is Charizard, so it's always going to be a somewhat viable option, but this might be one of the new best partners for Stoutland, which again is crazy considering there's only 3 days left of this ranked season. This is certainly a really fun deck, and a deck that actually is a lot better than honestly I could have ever assumed it to be. It's been winning quite a bit. Really, really cool. I wanted to showcase it. Next up is something that we have talked about already, but as all of the decks that we're going to be, out of all of the decks that we're going to be talking about in this video, Water type Silvally has probably ended up being actually the most viable. So this is interesting. Water hasn't seen play in quite some time, mainly because Electric type in Oricorio has really been pretty popular since it was released. Of course, being weak to Oricorio in terms of, taking more damage from that attack is definitely rough. Palkia EX 100% gets turned off from Oricorio, gets absolutely hard countered. However, we have Silvally, right? And Silvally being a colorless Pokemon, I've said this before, you can play it with basically any Pokemon. So why not just play it with Palkia, right? So yeah, we're playing the Manaphy-Palkia combination. Palkia is a really, really strong Pokemon. It always has been. And yes, it is hitting for weakness on a lot of the most powerful Pokemon in the game. Tons of fire type cards right now. We're also clearing, just in general, a lot of the Pokemon that are seeing play that aren't fire type. 150 is crazy, plus the damage to the bench. That's 20 damage to all your opponent's bench. Palkia EX's Dimensional Storm remains to be potentially the strongest attack in the entire game. We're playing 2 copies of Misty's, we're playing 2 Manaphy, so we're going to be able to get this attack off very, very consistently. The cool upside here is that Manaphy does, of course, generate energies to the bench. So even if we are leading off with Manaphy, we can just kind of use Oceanic Gift to set up Silvally, then come in. We can even play Misty's as our supporter card for the turn, as long as we're just not, of course, using it on Silvally. We can use it on Palkia or whatever while it's on the bench. Tons of supporter cards in here. We even have 1 copy of Leaf, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars. You could even play Irida in here, but I don't think it's necessarily as needed. 1 Giant Cape on Palkia. Palkia is just a really, really underrated card. It's been one of the strongest Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket in previous formats. Silvally's out right now. So yeah, here it is, guys. In my mind, the best water deck of the format right now. Fire is certainly one of the most common types in the game, but this isn't the video game. So like, water isn't weak to grass, not in Pokemon Pocket. These are all weak to electric type. So it's actually fundamentally quite strong against Buzzwole as well. I really, really like this list. It's actually emerged in my mind as probably like a significant meta deck. It's been winning a lot, been doing well, been placing well in tournaments, seen it a little bit in Master Ball rank as well. This is just a really strong deck that, for whatever the reason, took us a long time to find out, or I guess to just kind of find its way into the metagame. So another massively, massively interesting Pokemon, an archetype that, for whatever the reason, just took so long for us to play, but is honestly a meta deck. It's Silvally, so it's going to be strong, just like the Charizard deck with Stoutland. But that aside, I think that Palkia Silvally actually has a lot of synergy. I think that Oceanic Gift Manaphy is an absolutely broken card. Yeah, there's some Electric type in the format right now, so you got to be a little bit scary, or not. You're going to be a little bit scared of those Electric type decks, but honestly, the chances of you hitting them are quite slim. The most popular decks in the game right now are Buzzwole, Guzzlord, and the fire type decks, and other Silvally decks. So this is actually quite well positioned, more than you might think. So here it is. Silvally Palkia, we've talked about it before, and to be honest with you, when I first mentioned it, it was kind of just this meme deck that I didn't think we'd see much of, but really has emerged as a proper meta contender here at the end of the format, which is very, very, very cool. Next up, we're going to go into just a variety of Magnezone decks, because Magnezone is something that I think recently again popped up here at the end of the format that has been seeing play in a ton of different decks, and I think it's really kind of filling the space of that Turbo Silvally deck, which we put at S tier a couple of weeks ago. The main reason why Silvally and Zeraora, that like Electric type Turbo Silvally deck, was so good was because it was an Oricorio deck that was also a Silvally deck that was of course weak to Rampardos, but Rampardos was really falling off in play significantly, and it really kind of filled this niche that was really strong against most of the decks that were remaining at the top of the metagame. So Turbo Silvally kind of dominated, and it was, in my mind, the best deck to play for almost a whole week. But then what happened was that people realized, well, listen, if Rampardos isn't seeing that much play, there's other Electric-type Pokemon that are really good, namely Magnezone. So there's a lot of different ways that we can play Magnezone. We have 3 different Magnezone decks here to take a look at. Magnezone has really filled this really interesting niche later in the format where it is a counterplay to Silvally. It's actually really strong against Silvally. It can 1-hit KO with 110 damage, very consistent. It's Electro-type, so we can pair it with a variety of different Pokemon, and namely Oricorio, which is kind of an auto-win against some of the most popular decks of the format still, and 140 HP means we're living quite a few attacks as well. Pokemon Center Lady, just tons of good stuff. PCL oftentimes sees play with Oricorio, just so maybe you can outpace certain stuff. Magnezone in general, just a massively strong card, and really well positioned. I think, honestly, a lot of the Silvally decks have really dipped in play. This is certainly a deck that's going to be really strong against Silvally and Palkia, which we just took a look at, but Magnezone is definitely on the rise. Again, a few different ways in which we can play Magnezone, something that really popped up here in the last week, and I think that honestly Magnezone is as good as any other Pokemon in the format. Magnezone just keeps sort of showcasing itself. It just keeps emerging, typically at the end of formats for whatever the reason. I think previously it saw play last format because Meowscarada became really popular as a counter meta pick, and then Magnezone sort of countered the counter meta. So I think the same thing is kind of going on right now. Silvally has ended up just kind of seeing play in so many different decks. Why don't we just play, Magnezone? It's strong against Silvally. It pairs well with Oricorio. There's a couple of different ways that we can play it. So why not? Magnezone is one of those Pokemon that's really consistent, really flexible, probably going to end up seeing play in Pokemon Pocket for quite some time. I don't really see this card getting power crept much. It's just incredible. It's consistent. It's one of the best Stage 2 Pokemon that we have in the game right now. It's also a single prize archetype, which is really, really cool. This deck list is pairing it with Zeraora. We're not even playing Dawn. We're mainly just using Zeraora here as like an aggro attacker, but also just a kind of a flexible leadoff option that can act as a free retreat. So again, leading Oricorio technically isn't very good, especially if we are, of course, going first. Zeraora likes to go first because we generate that free energy on our first turn. We can hit for 50 damage on the following turn going second if we're going first or second. So it's a really strong, aggressive leadoff option, but also has basically free retreat because it generates that free energy. So we would much rather lead with Zeraora than Oricorio or Magnemite, and that's really the whole idea with this list. We're not even playing Dawn or anything. You don't need to. It just gives the deck a little bit of flexibility and a little bit more pace in terms of being able to kind of do damage earlier. Strong going first as well. That's definitely a big upside for sure. So yeah, Magnezone also likes to go first if you really think about it, because of course you can attach on that first turn, but then you get the evolution off first, right? So you can evolve turn 2 into Magneton, attach, and then use Volt Charge, accelerate that energies. Then on your third turn, you can Volt Charge again, and then just evolve into Magnezone. So that is basically, you're able to attack for 3 energies on Magnezone going first, which is another underrated upside of Magnezone that people don't really talk about. It's actually quite a strong Pokemon going first, which isn't something that there's really many of in Pokemon Pocket. So this is a deck that actually is quite good going first, and you're playing Oricorio, so you're going to win some games for sure. That's really what this Magnezone deck is all about, but you guys are probably more interested in this version of Magnezone, which is going to be with the Shiinotic. This is probably the version that has become most popular over the last week or so. For, again, the same reasons that other Shiinotics see play. It just makes these Stage 2 decks a little bit more consistent in terms of your ability to not only, more oftentimes find your Pokemon. Like Shiinotic is a card that gets exponentially better the longer the game goes on. Magnezone decks kind of carry into the late game. We've got multiple high HP single prize Pokemon plus Oricorio. These particular matchups, when you're playing Magnezone, like to kind of drag into that turn 5, turn 6 range, and that's really kind of where you can overcome your opponent to some respect. Shiinotic is really good as just a consistency option, but what it does do is effectively thin cards out of your deck. I kind of mentioned something similar about the new Sylveon card, which we will talk about in a future date. When you're playing cards that basically just pull other cards out of your deck whenever they're, C play or whenever it's your turn, you're effectively running, like when you're playing Shiinotic, you're basically running like 18 cards in your deck or 16 cards in your deck, because whenever you evolve Shiinotic, you're almost guaranteed to just draw another card with it. Sylveon, that's coming out soon, Silvally EX has the similar effect. So even though you do have to take up 4 spots in your deck to play this particular Pokemon line, because they thin out other cards of your deck, you're effectively just playing less cards in your deck, which does make your deck a bit more fast-paced and consistent into the late game. One of the things that Shiinotic has done, and we've seen this with Solgaleo decks, which I kind of, underrated initially with Shiinotic, is that because it thins Pokemon out of your deck, and of course after we do that for a couple of turns, really all it does is leave less cards or more cards in your deck that you would rather draw right into the late game. There's so many scenarios where, hey, we would like to draw our Sabrina or our Cyrus or our Professor's Research or a Mars or something. When you thin all of the Pokemon out of your deck, you're increasing the odds of drawing those supporter cards, which are potential win conditions late in the game. That's what Shiinotic does greatly against when you're playing Solgaleo. Is like when it's turn 6 or 7, it's like, like the only cards left in their deck, they only got like 3 or 4 cards and they're all useful cards to them. And that's what Shiinotic really does, is increase the potential to draw useful cards late in the game. Does the same thing for Magnezone, as well as, of course, giving you free Pokemon. So Shiinotic is a really good Pokemon, pairs nicely with Magnezone. The other reason why it pairs nicely with Magnezone is because we are playing the Stage 1 evolution, right? So we're increasing those odds to get that Stage 2 evolution out, that Magneton, on our second turn, or I guess as early as possible, because that is predominantly still the downside with Magnezone, is that you don't play rare candy. So if you don't get the Magneton out on that second turn, or at the latest your third turn, you're going to be in a kind of a rough position, because then of course you still have to Volt Charge and then you still have to evolve again into Magnezone. So Shiinotic really does help with that as well. This is a really good list. It's Magnezone Oricorio, and I know some people think this is like a brand new archetype and that this thing's been popping off, but Magnezone Oricorio has been around for quite some time. There's just like 3, 4, maybe even 5 different ways that we're playing it in the format right now. It ended up last format winning the largest Pokemon Pocket tournament of all time. So again, we have to really just, in retrospect, look at Magnezone and Oricorio as a match made in heaven and one of the best combinations that we've ever had in Pokemon Pocket. This just ends up being kind of the newest way to play it. Shiinotic ends up improving an archetype that was already good previously. All right, lastly, we've got Magnezone Oricorio, but now we have Tapu Koko. So this is also an interesting one that's seeing play. You know, Tapu Koko with Electrical Cord is a good combination. We've seen it multiple times. The downside to this particular list is that Tapu Koko likes to be kind of the original Pokemon. It likes to be the first Pokemon that you have in play. You know, you do some early damage, you're really fast-paced, you're really aggressive, but it's worth 2 prize cards, and it doesn't have a lot of HP. So yes, we could potentially take an early KO with Tapu Koko. That's what it does best, but if it goes down, we are very reliant on Magnezone kind of clearing out the rest of the game here, or potentially Oricorio. Now, Magnezone is interesting because it's a late game Pokemon. So this is a little bit different than most other decks in terms of how these Pokemon interact. Most decks like to have a strong EX Pokemon as the last Pokemon that your opponent has to KO. And then they have some sort of smaller, more fast-paced non-EX Pokemon kind of on the front line that kind of, starts the game and, forces your opponent to kind of go through those Pokemon. And then the EX Pokemon, this deck is kind of the opposite. Tapu Koko really is that Pokemon that we want to have early in the game. And then, of course, we have Oricorio and Magnezone as the late game option. Only 1 copy of Tapu Koko for sure, but all of our Pokemon have a retreat cost of 1. We are playing 1 copy of Leaf, so this is a little bit less of a consistent deck in the early game, but quite many different options for us in the late game, which I think is honestly quite good. Also, like attaching and retreating with Magnemite really doesn't feel that bad because we can just evolve and then bring that energy back. And we also have Electrical Cord. So this is a very strange deck, but again, Magnezone and Oricorio has proven to just be one of the better archetypes. Tapu Koko is a really strong new Electric-type Pokemon. And even if it is a Pokemon that we bring into the late game, potentially speaking, we can bring it in and just start hitting for 90 in the late game, which isn't like a tremendous amount of damage, but 90 plus the 110 for Magnezone will be taking KOs. We do have 130 HP, so we are living in attack from a variety of different Pokemon, just not like that many. So yeah, I mean, Tapu Koko, it's a flexible card. This is a pretty strong deck. And I think that Magnezone Oricorio is, in general, just kind of broken, which is, again, why I kind of wanted to focus on it a little bit in this video. I just think that this is a combination that always pops up at the end of formats because it ends up finding some niche in the metagame. Right now, Magnezone is a kind of direct Silvally counter, just as it was as a Meowscarada counter in previous formats, and it'll probably counter whatever other strong single prize archetype is around. Again, I think Meowscarada in general was a better Pokemon than Magnezone. I think Silvally is a better Pokemon than Magnezone, but Magnezone counters those particular Pokemon, so it kind of ends up just seeing play. It's like the counter Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket, and it probably will be for time to come. So keep that in mind. Never forget Magnezone because it'll probably pop up again in some new version of how we're playing the particular deck, and I think it's just it's a really strong combination, honestly. Probably gets carried by Oricorio, but like I said, good matchups into a lot of different decks at the top of the metagame right now. Worth mentioning, we live a hit from Buzzwole as well. Honestly, it's just a strong... I mean, the breakpoints in this format are way different than they were in previous formats as well. Like, 140 is a lot more HP than it was previously. People aren't playing Red or Giovanni or anything like that. Not that Red does damage to Magnezone, but before, the format was all like one-hit KO on like basic Pokemon with like Giratina Darkrai or... Palkia, things like that. Arcee's doing 130. Magnezone just lives attacks from most of the Pokemon in this format. Buzzwole does 120. Giratina does 130. Guzzlord does 120. Like, it's just how it goes. Even with Giant Cape, we're living in attack from Charizard even. So keep that in mind. Just an incredible Pokemon in terms of positioning in the format right now. So yeah, here it goes. There's Magnezone Zeraora. Lastly, we're going to talk about something that some people might find to be a little bit interesting. And by interesting, I mean silly. But you know what? Here it is. This is literally, what is this, 15 trainer Silvally with 1 Giratina. This deck, again, probably seems absolutely ridiculous, but you have to imagine for a moment that, you know, Giratina and Darkrai is one of the best Pokemon, or I guess best archetypes in Pokemon Pocket of all time, if not the best. And it plays literally 4 Pokemon and it plays a ton of trainer cards. Why don't we just implore that, basically that same strategy, but instead of playing Giratina and Darkrai, we're playing Silvally and Giratina. It's a little bit less awkward, but what this does do is turn the going first portion of playing Silvally into something that is at least somewhat manageable. We can just play Psychic Energies with this deck as well, which does give us that advantage of doubling up on Giratina and potentially just attacking on our 3rd turn all the time with Giratina, which is generally really, really strong if it does end up needing to happen. Of course, you know, Silvally as well is a Pokemon that likes to go second, so this is sort of your going second aggressive, you know, aggro Pokemon. But if we're going first, Silvally is technically a little bit underwhelming, so we can spend those few turns, you know, broken space bellowing with Giratina and then have that option on the back line. Theoretically speaking, going through 2 Silvallys and having to go through a Giratina is pretty rough, right? And that in general, I think, is the flow of this particular deck. That's how it kind of functions. Tons of supporter cards here because we're not playing many Pokemon. That's good for Silvally, but overall good for the flexibility of this deck. 2 Research, 2 Gladion, 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars, 1 Leaf, 1 Giovanni, 1 Red, and then we have 1 Potion, 2 Giant Capes, 2 Pokeball. We're able to play 2 Giant Capes in Silvally, which is really good in the mirror match for Silvally, but is also going to be good against Magnezone and then against a variety of different things. 130 is a really, 130 HP is a much better amount than 110 is, right? There's just so many Pokemon that can KO you at 110. That's sort of how they designed the game. Buzzwole, Guzzlord, Magnezone, I mean, a ton of different stuff is hitting for 110 or more, but 130 is definitely that breakpoint. So yeah, again, this deck may seem silly, but this is a deck list that has seen some play in tournaments, but is just seeing actually a ton of play in Master Ball rank as basically just one of the more consistent aggro decks in the entire game. Giratina, flexible, Silvally, flexible. Why not play them together? It works better than, you know, we ever, I guess, could have thought, but it seems so simple, right? It's like, why did it take 3 weeks for people to start playing this deck list? I don't know, but it is good. It really is a strong deck, something that I've actually wanted to test myself. To be honest with you, there's not much else to say about it. It's Silvally, it's Giratina, tons of supporter cards. You're probably going to win some games. That's really what it comes down to. You know, I think that with Rare Candy, with Shiinotic, and with all these other sort of combinations that we've gotten that are really strong in the format, it makes still sense to me that playing just a very limited amount of Pokemon is still an upside. The cool thing about Silvally is, like, we can just play 2 copies of Gladion. We've got 2 copies of Professor's Research, 2 Pokeball. And we could even just play 16 Trainer Silvally, and it would be consistent because of the 2 copies of Gladion. Giratina, I think, just kind of makes it that particular strategy just a little bit better, right? So that's, I think, what the thought process was for this deck. It was like, do we really need to pair anything with Silvally? Why don't we just play 16 Trainer Silvally? And then someone was like, well, I mean, if we play 1 copy of Giratina, it's theoretically just better. So there it is. And then that's how 15 Trainer Silvally with Giratina, I think, emerged. I'm not the one who created this deck, so I don't know, but that's sort of my assumption. But anyway, guys, there it is. Seeing a ton of play in high Master Ball tier, something that maybe you should try yourself because it's kind of just broken. So there it is, guys. I don't know how many decks that was. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decks. That's typically what we cover in these types of videos. 7 new decks that are definitely meta decks that are doing quite well in tournaments and in ranked battles that have popped up just in the last few days. If this format that we're playing in right now wasn't ending, if this wasn't the shortest format that we've ever had, I expect that we would have seen a massive amount of evolution going even into like the 4th week or even the 5th week if it were to happen. So that evolution can still happen. There's going to be a little bit of a wrench thrown in because of EV Grove and all of the awesome new cards that I assume are coming in that expansion. We'll cover all of those decks and all of that stuff, of course, in future videos. So you're going to want to stay tuned and check all of that stuff out. But anyway, guys, here you go. Hopefully this video was interesting to you guys. I would love to hear your opinions down below. What do you think of these late metas, all of these new decks popping up? I know some people didn't feel super strongly about this particular format and the decks that were good in this format. In general, I thought this format was very well balanced. There was a massive variety of decks that saw play. Even though half of those were Silvally decks, the other half were mostly Ultra Beast decks. There was a lot of really strong archetypes that saw play in this format that were all viable, which I think is healthy for the game and pretty cool for the game as well. Hopefully next format is even better. We'll cover it here on the channel, of course. I'm going to get out of here, guys. Peace out. A short one today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned. Comment below again what you thought of all of the stuff we talked about in this video. And yeah. let's get out of here, okay? All right. Bye.